First thing I would like to talk about, so of course there's a lot of hype and a lot of discussions about AI. Everything we're going to be discussing today is non-technical, meaning you don't have to be a technical person to understand how to start using AI to improve. And all the concepts we're going to be discussing here today are available to everybody without, or you don't need any technical background. For the agenda items that we're going to be talking today, first I would like to give an introduction of the main use cases for AI tools out there in the market. So again, we hear a lot about agents and AI tools being used. It's important that we start to understand what we mean when we talk about these tools and the different use cases there are. Then I'm going to be talking about the main focus of our masterclass today, so getting more out of your AI chatbot, how to engage and really use it as a thinking buddy, and not as I think most people are using, which is a simple search tool or something that they try to work with sometimes, but they don't really manage to get a lot of value out of it. And then towards the end, we're going to go into some more advanced topics a little bit and start talking about how you can configure your chatbot so that it reacts better to your way of working, the problems you're trying to solve. Another thing is you don't need to worry about taking notes. We're going to be going through some slides today. I'm going to be sharing also my screen where we use an AI chatbot. All the prompts we use, all the slides we show, plus a lot of additional information are in a bunch of handouts we prepared for you guys. So just make sure you sign up and you'll get all the handouts. We're going to be sending those out in the next 24 to 48 hours. And they're going to contain all the information we discuss here today. So you don't need to worry about taking notes also. Maybe just a short introduction. My name is Thiago Garces. I'm a partner at Agilar. We help companies improve. We work with teams up to leadership. And of course, one of the topics we've been exploring in the last year has been AI. We're very curious about the impact that this technology can have on our effectiveness and productivity. And we've started to create learning programs now, sharing the experiences and the knowledge we've gained in these experiments, right? So as I said in the beginning, while there is a lot of hype around AI, some of it which I don't personally agree with, it's undeniable that this technology has a lot of potential. It can definitely help us be more effective at the work we do, which is why it's important for everybody to understand how to use these tools and work with these tools. And that's what we hope you get out of our masterclass today. If you find the content we discuss here useful, be sure to also subscribe to our YouTube or LinkedIn, as we'll be coming out with additional content and also e-learning courses connected to AI that might be interesting for you. One final note is, for this masterclass today, when I share my screen, the AI chatbot I will be using is ChatGPT. It's typically the most popular one out there today, but you can, all the concepts we discuss here today apply with whatever AI chatbot you're using, whether it's Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, or some other chatbot. So don't worry about that. All the concepts we're discussing here today, you can use in whatever chatbot you have. Great, so let's get started. Now, I think it's important when I approach the subject, I'm not a technical person by background. I was always interested in the use cases that we have with AI. So, and I like to think about it in the context of when we're talking about AI tools, right? There's two basic levers that you're going to experience. One is the amount of interaction that is required from you, right? The human involvement. Is there high human involvement? So the AI tool is sitting there waiting for you to prompt it or to write so it can reply. Or is it low human involvement in the sense that it knows what it needs to do and it can just do it? And the other axis is about autonomy, right? How much autonomy does the AI tool have? In some cases, you're going to see there's very limited autonomy. There's very little they can do. And then you can add more capabilities and give these tools more and more autonomy, right? So they become actually very independent and they can do work by themselves. So if you think about this, like the first main use case we're going to have are the AI chatbots, which are going to be our focus today in this session, right? So an AI chatbot is going to require a lot of human involvement. So it's sitting there waiting for you to prompt it. And when you ask it to do something, it'll do it. But if you don't ask it to do something, it's not going to do anything, right? And it has very low autonomy. Essentially, it cannot break anything, right? All it's going to do is it's going to give you some output that you can choose to copy, paste, and use somewhere else or not, okay? The second kind of AI tool or use case that we have is what I would like to call the specialists, right? Where you see human involvement is going down. So think about like a specialist is something that you would go to when you need a very specific task done, something that's recurring and it always follows the same process. So there's going to be some human involvement in training and defining the process and training that tool. But once the tool understands the process and the work it has to do, it can do it with very little human involvement. You just send it a file and it's going to process it and generate the outputs that you expected based on how you trained it, and the examples you shared with it previously. So tools like Grammarly, for example. So you want something to check the grammar on the emails you're sending out, or some custom specialist you create. Like, for example, I want to process a certain file in a certain way. So parse this file, extract these data, you explain the process, and it's going to do it repetitively, always in the same way. The third kind of use case I would highlight here is what I would call assistants, right? So these are tools that require a lot of human involvement, but they start to have a lot of autonomy, right? The specialist, while they can do something, they have a little bit more autonomy than the chatbot, of course. They can't do much. They can just edit that one file, or they're just going to generate a PDF output for you, right? The assistant starts to have a lot more autonomy, right? So they're going to have access to more tools, but they're kind of like a junior team member, okay? So this is somebody that is going to need constant supervision, and is probably a part of a larger workflow you have, right? So imagine I want to have an AI tool to help me manage all the calendar invites I have, and to manage my calendar. So part of the autonomy is I'm going to give it access to my calendar so that it can do things with my calendar, send new events, decline events, accept events, etc. But it's still going to need me in the workflow. It's not going to decide everything by itself, right? So that's why it's an assistant. Another example would be AI tools that are embedded in specific products. Think about like Miro, for example. If you like to use Miro, there's an AI assistant in Miro that's going to help you do some of the tasks you try to do in Miro, right? It's still going to need a lot of involvement for you. It doesn't do everything by itself, but it helps you get specific workflows done quicker. And then the fourth type of AI use case I would highlight would be like what I would call team members. So these are AI tools that have a lot of autonomy, so they can do a lot of things independently, and they don't require a lot of human involvement, meaning you've spent a lot of time setting them up, and they can actually do a lot of work, right? So this is not like a junior team member you have to supervise. It's more like a colleague, right? It's taking care of some responsibilities in the company. Now, you hear a lot of people talking about agents, right? And AI agents. What I would argue is that all these three use cases I'm describing beyond the chatbot are all types of agents, right? So that's the agent frontier I described there. And I think the way to think about agents, the price to pay here. So if you want to have your AI chatbot become an agent or start doing agents type work, you need to give it access to your system. It needs to have access to your calendar, to your email, to your accounting platform, to whatever it is, which means it can start changing real things and it can start breaking things, right? So there's a risk there. But that would be the agent frontier when you start moving to those three other use cases. What we're going to be doing here today, and what I recommend people do when they start exploring or working with AI tools, is to start understanding chatbots and working effectively with chatbots. If you're not able to get value or have AI chatbots help you do some work, then you're probably going to struggle with these more advanced concepts like specialists, assistants, or team members, right? So we're going to start with chatbots, also because, of course, it's the lowest risk. It cannot break anything yet because it does not have access to any of your systems or tools or calendars or email. So let's take a look at how this would work. So you see here I have my, right, and this would be like an example of any AI chatbot. There I am. Sorry. And that would be an example of any other AI chatbot. And I can come here and I can ask, so if I just, let's see, I want to ask it, okay, I live in Brussels and I'm curious, hey, what's the weather like in Brussels tomorrow? And it's going to think for a second. You see they're searching the web, and it's going to give me the answer of the weather forecast in Brussels, right? This is how I see a lot of people using an AI chatbot. This is basically Google, right? So you're asking the AI chatbot to Google for you the answer for this, and it can do that very well. And it gives me a nice little summary. But I could also ask it to do, let's say, some more advanced things. So here I'm asking for, hey, I'm looking for an email app to manage my Gmail. Can you compare the best options and make a recommendation, right? And here we start to see, okay, why this is better than just a Google is it has some intelligence, right? It can take that request I'm giving it, and you see it's processing there the answer and saying, okay, well, if you're a Gmail heavy workflow, the best app is going to depend on the features. So you see it, this intelligence coming into play, right? It's not just a search engine. It's able to understand my request and it's going to give me a very reasonable answer. Okay, so here's the best overall if you're a heavy professional use. If you're worried about the value, or just like a normal human and you're not a heavy user, then Spark might be the better option, etc. Right? So it's giving me some alternatives on how to do it, and then in the end, it's giving me a recommendation. So with a very simple question I asked about, hey, what's the best app for me to manage my Gmail? It's giving me a really good answer with different options and etc. But also important to notice, my request was very simple, right? So you can also tell that the chatbot is starting to maybe assume some things about my case, right? Or it's giving me different options, but I didn't give it a lot of information or context. So it's giving me a pretty standard but intelligent response. Now, so let's take a look at how our chatbot's really structured, right? When you try to think about when you're working with a chatbot, what are the different parts you're interacting with? And here again, it doesn't matter whether it's Gemini, Claude, or ChatGPT or another one, right? So the first part is that chatbot has a brain. Why is it able to process that simple request I asked about the Gmail app and give me a well-structured answer? Because it's intelligent. It has a brain. That's the LLM, right? The good news is the LLMs have gotten very good. So for the moment, at least for people starting off with using AI tools, you don't have to worry about which brain you're using, whether it's Google's or it's Anthropic's or it's OpenAI's. They're all good enough to do most of the stuff that we need to do. Yes, when you get to more advanced tasks, there are different brains that are going to be better at that. But for the moment, all of them are very, very good, which is good news, right? So it doesn't matter which one you're using, you can get a lot out of it. The second part of the chatbot is the UI, the part I was just sharing that you see me interacting with, right? That's where you write your prompts, where you give it additional context, and it also is going to have some additional features, right? So that's where you collaborate with the AI chatbot. The third thing an AI chatbot is going to have are capabilities, right? So it comes with some standard capabilities, any AI chatbot you're using. So it can do some research, it can take some basic decisions, it has some memory. And of course, you can add additional capabilities to it. And this is what you're doing is you're touching on the autonomy of the tool, of the chatbot. The more tools I integrate, the more autonomy I'm giving it. The more systems it has access to, the more things it can change. And the last part of that chatbot is the constraints, right? So you're also able to define certain processes or guardrails or things that are rules that it has to follow. Okay, and these are the four main elements that you have to tweak or play with when you're interacting with an AI chatbot. In this masterclass today, what we're doing is focusing on the UI and the constraints, which I think are the best ones to start practicing the core skills you need to collaborate effectively with AI, right? Like I said, the brain, yes, you can use different LLMs, and some are going to be better for specific things, but they're all very good. So for the moment, when you're getting started, it doesn't matter which one you're using. And the capabilities, yeah, it's very cool to add new capabilities and connect it to PowerPoint or to your calendar or to whatever it is. But remember, the more capabilities you add, the more autonomy it has, the more it can break things. So I always advise people start first practicing, working on the collaboration, on the prompting, context, and on giving those constraints. You're going to get great results already, and it's a safe play area to learn to practice those skills, right? So when we think about those core skills, right, we identify these four different main use cases or AI tool types that we use. On a chatbot, what you hear a lot of people talking about is you need to write good prompts, which is true, and we're going to go through like the structure of a good prompt in a second. But there are other skills you need to work on, right? So for example, writing a good prompt means you can define a good problem. You understand the task or the problem you're trying to solve, and you can define it clearly. You can structure a good prompt like we've been talking about, but you also know how to set the right context, which information is going to be useful to improve the AI chatbot's ability to give me a good reply, right? You also need to be able to evaluate the output, right? One of the themes I'll come back to a couple of times during this masterclass is, the AI doesn't make you more intelligent. Actually, you still need your intelligence, which is why I believe humans are not going to be replaced. You still need to be able to evaluate the output the AI is generating, because the AI is smart, but it's not perfect. It's going to give you something. And you need to know, is that something good enough? Does it need to be improved? You need to be able to evaluate that output, right? And another key topic we're going to be covering today is this idea of iterating on that output, right? The first reply is never going to be the best one. It's just like if you're working with a colleague on something, right? You say, hey, we need to work on this slide. And it's not that the first version of the slide you get back is, oh, great, thanks. No, you're going to have comments on it. You're going to read. You're going to think about, does this really work for me? Oh, what about this? Maybe we should try that. It's that iteration that's going to give you good outputs when you're working with AI chatbots, right? So today we're going to be covering these core skills that I think are important to practice. And more importantly, they're foundational, right? So you need these skills to be able to work effectively with specialists, assistants, or team members later, right? So practicing and learning these skills now are going to be a big help for you as you progress with AI tools. Good. So let's go back to our chatbot. So I'm going to have a different problem now. I'll start a new chat so we're fresh. And now I'm asking ChatGPT, hey, oops, sorry. Copy and pasted the wrong thing. There we go. So I'm asking ChatGPT, can you create a template to help me run my bi-weekly stakeholder alignment meeting, right? And you see very quickly, it says, okay, bi-weekly stakeholder alignment meeting template. And there you have it. So you're going to have a 45 to 60 minute meeting. It's bi-weekly. Here's the purpose. Here are the recommended attendees. So you see what's happening, right? If you ask this question to a human being, to a colleague, and you say, hey, Jack, can you help me create a template to run my bi-weekly stakeholder alignment meeting? The next thing Jack would do is start asking me a bunch of questions. Okay, how long is the meeting? Who is there? Like you're going to want to understand the context. What the AI chatbot is doing is, okay, this is the information you gave me, fine. I'll fill in the blanks, like I'll imagine the rest or decide on the rest, and I'm going to give you what I think is a good stakeholder alignment meeting template, okay? So it's not going to ask those follow-up questions. It's just going to do the task. AI is very good at jumping on the task you give it and trying to do it. So you see, this is not a really good example of a good prompt, right? And while I get a perfectly coherent and intelligent output, it's probably not going to work for my context, right? So for example, it's already telling me it's a 45 to 60 minute meeting, progress per work streams. It might not match the way I work, okay? So here's what we're gonna do. Imagine if I'm going to improve that prompt. And just a second. There you go. So now I'm saying, okay, you are the product owner of the investments app team within a large bank. You need to create a slide template that will be used during the sprint review to share with the key stakeholders about the progress. Your team uses Scrum, and every 2 weeks they have the sprint review where the key stakeholders are present. We spend 20 to 25 minutes doing the demo, so we only have 15 to 20 minutes for those slides. Also, the bank uses OKRs to set their goals, and we do this in a quarterly PI planning exercise, right? So please clearly indicate the content of each slide, which supporting data is needed, and if any graphs or other visuals would be helpful, right? So when I give it this context, it's of course going to give me something much more adapted, or this prompt, sorry, it's going to give me something much more adapted to my context, right? It's already considering I'm doing Scrum. We only have 15 or 20 minutes. This is the kind of information I want to have, right? So just by improving my prompt, instead of having a very high-level prompt, create a template to help me run my bi-weekly meeting, I spent some time thinking about this myself, and you see I'm defining the problem. That's one of the skills we're talking about. I write a much better prompt that doesn't take me 5 seconds to write, that maybe takes me 5 minutes to write. But I get a much better reply or output that's going to be much more connected to my context, okay? So the structure I'm using there, so what's the anatomy of a good prompt, right? First thing is, a good idea is give the AI a persona, right? So who are you? You are the product manager for this app. You are a SEO expert. And so the AI can take on that specialty, right? It's going to say, oh, okay, here's the persona I need to take when I'm doing this job. So first give it a role. As I said in the prompt I wrote, you are the product owner of an investments app within a large bank, right? Next thing would be the objective. What do you need to do? Your task is to create the template for the bi-weekly sprint review slides we use, right? Give it a specific problem. The problem definition skill, again, comes into play. The context, what information here is useful, right? So we do Scrum. We have these stakeholders. We have these other, like we take 20 to 25 minutes to do our demo. All the context information that's going to help the chatbot understand better what you need. And lastly, constraints, right? So are there any boundaries? Like we should only have 5 slides, or make sure the tone is professional. I want a lot of graphs. You put those constraints to help them, help the AI chatbot deliver something that's going to be adapted to your context, right? So the time, writing a good prompt takes some time, but that time invested is going to be paid for by the quality of the outputs that the chatbot is giving back to you, right? And here's a general like trick I think that's really helpful with AI. When I first started experimenting with AI tools, I quickly realized that the AI can coach you also, right? It's not perfect, but it's quite effective, right? So if I'm saying, I'm not sure if this is a good prompt or not, then paste the prompt you have right now and say, hey, this is the prompt I have right now. Can you help me improve the prompt? And it's going to help you improve that prompt, right? It actually can help you coach you through and trying to improve that prompt. It's going to give you some ideas, some suggestions, highlight where they think it's weak. And then you can take that feedback and use it or not, right? But you can use the AI to help you improve the prompts you're writing. And I think that's a good hack, especially if you need some experience or practice. Here you can see sometimes what the AI chatbot is generating as an idea, and you can compare and start thinking if this works for me or not. And remember, context is king, right? So one of the things you're going to hear a lot in the AI space, which, to be honest, I've been hearing in the IT space for the last 20 years, but basically like shit in, shit out, right? If you spend 2 seconds writing a prompt, don't expect to get like a perfect output that's going to be very useful to you. If you spend some time thinking about, the problem, defining a good problem, thinking about examples you want to share with the AI or any data you want to share that's going to be helpful for it to give it more context, that takes some time, but you're going to get much better outputs. Another pattern that I would recommend that's very important when working with an AI chatbot, and you saw in one of the core skills we highlighted there, is this idea on iterating on the reply, right? On the first output you get. Whether you're asking the AI chatbot to write an email for you, or to help you solve a problem or do some prioritization exercise, the first output you get is generally not going to be the best one, right? So the ability to challenge back to the AI and iterate on that output is going to be very effective. In the downloads that you get if you sign up, you see like we identify many of these patterns, right? So patterns like switch roles. So you can say, okay, great. Thanks for writing this email for me. Now switch roles. Imagine you're this other person. Like, how would you read this email, right? You can ask the AI to show their work. Okay, so can you explain, like you just gave me a reply here. How confident are you in this reply on a scale of 1 to 10? Why aren't you a 10? Like you can ask AI to show you how it thought about it, because again, you're still responsible for the work. You're still responsible for the outputs that the AI chatbot is generating, right? But by asking to show your work, it helps you see how it's thinking and spot maybe gaps in its thinking or things that you might not necessarily agree with. Forcing AI to take a decision, right? In my Gmail example, if I give it some more context, I eventually can say, okay, if you had to pick one for me, which one would you pick, right? And you're kind of forcing it to express an opinion, not because you're going to blindly follow it, but because it's helping you think through that problem, right? The help me help you pattern, the one I just said. So ask it, you can use AI to help you improve the prompt you're writing, or like, are there additional questions you have about this context? Am I missing some context information? And the AI chatbot can help you figure out what other information you should be providing. Or alternatives, right? Okay, this is a good option. Can we try a different approach? What would that look like? Okay. And there are some other challenge patterns you can use in the handouts that we have. But let's go through an example of this. So just a second. We'll switch back to the chatbot. So now I want to go through the scenario that imagining, and I'll start a new chat, keep it clean. So you see here, you're a senior salesperson. I'm using our prompt structure, okay? You're responsible for B2B sales of an e-learning platform. You need to create an email to send to potential buyers you would like to invite to your booth in the upcoming conference. Your company is announcing some exciting new features like skills-based recruiting, AI-powered assessments, blah, blah, blah. Keep the tone professional and inviting, avoid long sentences, and favor bullet points. So we're using our prompt structure to give the AI a task. Hey, I need help in writing this email. Okay. And so it goes, okay, here's your polished outreach email. It gives us a standard template, and it's going to be generally okay. Hey, we'll be showcasing this stuff. If you're exploring ways to strengthen talent development, feel free to stop by, etc. Now, one way to challenge that, so I read that email and I say, okay, this isn't bad. But now I can tell the AI chatbot, okay, now switch roles. You are now an HR director at a leading CPG company. What do you like or not like about this email? Considering you are approached by many B2B salespeople, how could this email be improved? Right? So I'm using one of those challenge patterns, and then the chatbot is going to think through it and say, okay, but from the perspective of an HR director, here are the things I like. It's clear and professional. It's easy to skim. Here's what I don't like. It sounds very vendor-centric, not buyer-centric. So it talks about what you're showcasing, not necessarily about my problems, right? So it's giving you some ideas on how to improve that email. So again, using those challenge patterns to get better results from the output the AI chatbot is giving you. All right. Now, beyond challenging, right? There's in the prompting part or setting effective constraints. There's additional things that you can work with in your AI chatbots to improve the output you're getting. For example, you could define in them standard operating procedures, right? So if you do a lot of market research, and when you're doing market research, you want it to follow a certain procedure, consider certain sources, or do this or don't do that, you can define those processes for your AI chatbot. So it's following the way you do that market research, right? That's the idea. Not that it's doing something that you don't know what it is and you're not happy with the quality or the process it's using to achieve that output. So you can define some standard operating procedures for your chatbot. You should and could give it a lot of context and examples. I think the key point here is not better than just describing the context, which is important, also give it examples. If I'm using the AI chatbot to help me write outbound emails, it would be a good idea to share some examples of what I think are good emails I've written in the past. So it can learn about my style, my tone, how I usually write emails. It's going to improve the outputs it gives me. They're going to match more my style and my tone. I'm going to have less editing to do later, right? Rules and standards, right? So if we have specific templates that we have to use, or standards, or this must be one page, or you cannot use these words, you can share those with the chatbot. Also, again, it's just going to improve the output it's giving because it has clear constraints set. And also the tone. You can tell it to, hey, be professional, or be amusing about this, or etc. The kind of tone you want it to give in the answer it's giving, you can define that in your chatbot settings, and this is going to give you outputs better matching what you need. The next thing I wanted to talk about here are projects, right? So we have, in the examples I've been giving in the chatbot, these are just sessions you open up, and you're describing a problem, you're giving it some context, you're giving it a prompt structure, and you're working through that task, right? That problem you were trying to solve. The issue is that works for very punctual things, right? So if, for example, if I need to write one outbound email of one type, and I can describe it quickly and I can iterate through it in one session, good. But if this outbound email is connected to a larger go-to-market strategy for a bigger product I'm working on, it's going to be difficult because there are other emails that we need to generate, other chats I'm going to have that should influence this email, etc. So in the chatbots, you have what are called projects, right? Different chatbots will call them different things, but essentially they all have the same basic feature, the ability to create a project, which is a separate space where it's going to store the context so you can define what the project is about. It's going to keep the history of the sessions as part of that context. And you can also share files, so you can upload a PowerPoint presentation or whatever it is. And it has that as part of its context, right? So every time you ask it a question, it's taking all that contextual information into account before giving you a reply. So you don't need to reset the context every time, right? So this, of course, is going to give you a lot better results for these larger topics you're working on. Like I said, they're available in all major chatbots. Typically, they will require a paid license. And you can also define specific processes for your project. So let's take a look what this looks like. go back to ChatGPT. So you see here at the bottom, I have my projects, and I set up a project. So I'm working on an e-learning app. It's called Beanstalk, and let's say I want to work on the go-to-market strategy. So I have a project for my Beanstalk go-to-market strategy. Now you see when I go to this project, I have like chats and sources here. Again, this will look different in different chatbots, but the basic functionality is the same. So in sources, I can upload documents here. So this, for example, what I did is I uploaded here the Beanstalk pitch deck, and it has, it's just slides. I converted it to a PDF, but it's just the slides explaining the product and like the basic pitch that we're giving. And I can add as many as I want here, right? And then I have different chats, and you see how they stay here, right? So if I'm talking about, hey, I'm curious about like the pricing model I have, right? And so I might ask it about, let's compare like what other pricing models in the B2B market or other e-learning platforms using. When I ask it that question initially, it has already all that context information from the files I shared and from the other chats I have, right? So the context keeps growing, and it gives me answers or outputs that are much more connected to what I really need, right? I don't need to keep re-explaining context. So projects can be real time savers to set that up for these larger topics or larger problems that you're working on. Good. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about, so we've gone through, let's say, some of the core skills and the basic techniques for working effectively with AI chatbots. Again, be sure to download the handouts, I think, or put your email there so we can send them to you. There's going to be a lot of like all the examples we're sharing here, plus additional information to help you get started with that. But I would also like to talk a little bit about, one thing is like writing an email or something like this, but the topic, like the tagline for the class today was, AI as a thinking buddy, right? So let's imagine we're trying to work through a real problem, right? Not something so simple as I want to write an email, but I have a problem that I'm trying to solve. And I like to go through this example because it helps to show, and what I hope to show now, how you can start really configuring that chatbot to work the way you need it to work to help you solve real problems. Okay, so this is a framework I like to use to solve problems. It's kind of like a custom-made one that I picked things up from different places, but this works for me. There are a million ways to do this. I will share this with you guys, of course, but it doesn't necessarily work for you. You might want to use something else, right? But it's just to give you an example of what you can do with your AI chatbot. So if I have to work through a specific challenge or problem, what's the first thing I'm going to do is I want to define the problem, right? So I might be using a framework like the 4Ws, like who, what, when, where, or the jobs to be done, but I want to come up with a clear one-sentence problem definition, right? If I cannot summarize that problem I'm trying to solve in one sentence, I probably don't really understand it, okay? So by defining that problem in one sentence, it helps me understand what I need, but it also helps me explain it to the AI, right? So in my problem-solving framework, that would be the first step to do. Once I have clarity on that problem, then I want to put some structure to that problem, right? So I like to use the MISI framework, which stands for mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive, which basically means you divide that big problem into small sub-problems that are independent from each other, right? But together, all those sub-problems make up the full problem. So that's the comprehensively exhaustive part, right? So I will divide that big problem into smaller problems. Okay, so there's a problem here, there's another issue here, there's another issue here, the different sub-problems that are involved in this bigger problem. And this helps me structure the problem. Then once I have that breakdown done, then I can start focusing on each sub-problem and identifying different options, right? So I want to brainstorm a little bit and diverge. So if I have a problem related to, I don't know, something bad is like we're losing money on this specific market segment, it was trending upwards, now it's trending downwards. There might be different options that we can take to try to reverse that trend, right? I don't want to jump on the first solution I think about, let's just lower prices. Like maybe there are other things we could do. So I want to diverge and brainstorm different options I have to find a solution for that specific part of the problem, right? And then once I've done that for the entire problem structure, then I can prioritize and execute. Then I say, okay, now I have a bunch of options for all these sub-problems I identified. which one do I think is the most important one to start with, right? And then I can start prioritizing and executing, doing the work, whether it's analysis or research or whatever it is, so that I start advancing on it, right? So this is the basic process I like to take when solving a problem. And then, of course, once you prioritize and execute, like a good agilist, you inspect and adapt. You see where you are, you learn from that, you adapt, and you keep going until you've managed to solve the problem or come up with at least solutions that you think should be implemented, right? So if this is the framework I like to use to address problems, I can train my chatbots to follow that process, okay? And this is where it was a big insight for me when I started experimenting with AI tools, is the fact that I can program the chatbot, and I'm not a technical person. Like, I don't know how to write code, but I can program my chatbots to behave how I want it to behave. I found that pretty cool. So programming your AI chatbot. If I want to, this problem-solving approach that I use, if I wanted to program that into my chatbot, it's going to look something like this, right? I'm basically defining a standard operating procedure. I'm not going to read everything in detail, but if you just take a look at it, right, this is just written in plain English, right? It's okay. You are a problem-solving architect. Guide me through the 6-step process. Do not skip ahead. Wait for my approval after every step. And then every step is defined: problem definition, MISI breakdown, tree of thought, prioritization, execution, etc. Right? And I'll show you what that looks like. On ChatGPT. So there's 2 ways to do this. One nice way, and I would recommend you guys do this, again, not just for ChatGPT, it's the same for any AI chatbot you're using. You're going to have the possibility to personalize it, right? So if I go to personalization here in my ChatGPT, I have different options, right? There are some basic things about, how the tone I want it to take, etc. How should it call me? What's my occupation? But that slide I just showed you with that text, right? Here are custom instructions. So you can program your ChatGPT, your AI chatbot, to react in specific ways, right? So those instructions you saw on the slide, I posted them here, right? So there's a trigger. If I say switch to problem-solving mode, then you give me this reply, and we're going to go through that process, okay? So let's try that. If I say switch to problem-solving mode here, problem-solving mode activated. Do you already have a clear 1-sentence problem definition, or should we start there? I do have a problem, or I don't. I'm going to give it a generic, oops, didn't copy the I. So I am the product manager for a real estate online platform where people can find properties to rent or buy. One of our main revenue streams is people paying to promote their properties. This is going down. So I don't have a clear problem statement yet, right? I have a basic problem understanding that I'm describing here. So because now it's following my process for how I address problems, it knows the first step is problem definition. So, okay, you provided some useful context, then it's going to propose to me some options, right? So your current version is divided by mixes. So a sharper version could look like: the conversion rate of property listers purchasing paid promotion features has declined over time, despite stable listing volume, resulting in decreasing promotion revenue, right? So that would be my problem statement. So before we move to the MISI breakdown, are you satisfied with this problem definition, or should we iterate further? Normally you would iterate further, as I've been saying, but for purposes of time, I'm just saying it's good. Let's continue. So then it goes to my step 2, my MISI breakdown structure, and it says, okay, we're going to use MISI to divide this into sub-problems. So 1, you have a problem of awareness and discovery. 2nd, you have a problem of perceived value, right? Then you might have a problem of pricing and packaging. And you see how these are independent problems, right? One is like, are people aware my product exists? Do people understand the value of my product? Is my pricing or my packaging wrong? Do I have the right target user mix, right? So it's defining these different subgroups. And then in the end, it's going to say, okay, are you satisfied with this MISI breakdown or should we iterate further? Normally, you should iterate further a little bit, like make it yours, read the reply, evaluate the output. But just to show you how the process would work, again, I say it's good. Oops. Let's continue. So step 3, now it's doing like for each of those sub problems that we defined. For awareness and discovery, what are different things we could do, right? So approach A, visibility regression. Approach B, messaging ineffectiveness, like different root causes for the problem we're having, right? So you see what's happening here? It's basically guiding me through this step here, right? So when you guys get this in your handouts, you get this my little problem solving approach. You could always go, if you just want to play around with it, you can go and copy paste it into your custom instructions in ChatGPT, and it switches to a problem solving architect every time you write that trigger word, right? Now, if you think about it, this process I defined is a standard process that's repeatable, right? So actually, it would probably be better as a specialist, right? So in the sense of if I have a repeatable process and every time I want to structure a problem, I want to go through this basic process or approach, then I could configure a specialist. So in ChatGPT, this is called a GPT. If you're using Gemini, this is called a gem. If you're using Claude, it's called a skill. So every AI chatbot is going to have some version of this. Basically, the specialist, this repetitive process that we follow over and over again, right? So I could just configure this as a specialist in ChatGPT, and then I don't even need to write the trigger. Let's switch to problem solving mode. I would just open my problem solver GPT, and it already takes that process, and that's the process it's going to run me through, right? So you see here on my ChatGPT, this we did in a normal chat. But if I go here on the sidebar, you see my GPT's problem solver. If I click on that, it automatically opens up structured 6-step problem solving guide, and it's ready to go. I don't even need to write the trigger. It's just ready to solve problems, right? That would be an example of a specialist that I configure on my AI chatbots to handle specific types of situations. So here you're already crossing that agent frontier a little bit, right? Like it depends. If you're giving this this GPT access to some tools, you can already start crossing a little bit that agent frontier we discussed in the beginning. But I think like these two things, right? So the AI chatbots basically using it as a thinking buddy, or trying to already create some of these standard process for some of these repetitive works you do, is something you can start playing around with and investigating and seeing how it can help you, right? And you can always take my the problem solving approach process I'm sharing and then customize it to you, right? So this is a message I say here. There are places you can download and buy a bunch of these specialists, right? Just these, like the one I shared, that people create for whatever repetitive task they need done, right? I always tell people it's a good idea to be inspired, so take a look at them, but I would not just buy these things. I think it's important that you build your own, right? So be inspired, but don't copy directly. So you can be inspired by the one I have. Okay, this is how it works, but then you edit it, to match how you prefer to work, because you need to think about that process. You need to make sure that the specialist is following a process you're comfortable with, right? Not just somebody else's process. Yeah, so when to use a chat, a project, or a specialist, think about it. Like, so in the AI chatbot, a simple chat, that's when you have something small and punctual, like help me write this difficult email, okay? If you have a larger topic or something that takes a longer time, you would create a project in your AI chatbot, so you have all that context information stored, and every interaction you have with it, all the chats you're having with it, all become part of this larger context for the project, right? If you have a repetitive task, like a standard process you want to follow every time, or a way to treat a specific file that you need to do in a recurring fashion, then you could configure a specialist, right? A GPT, a gem, or a skill. Yeah, so to go back a little bit to the core skills, we've talked today about the importance of problem definition, of understanding what problem you're trying to solve. Like, you should be able to explain this to yourself first for you to be able to write a good prompt, and for the AI chatbot to be able to do a lot with it, right? We talked about structuring good prompts and a basic approach to take to write good prompts. The idea and the importance of context setting, right? So you should be giving your AI chatbot a lot of examples and additional information that can help it understand the context to provide you better outputs, right? The ability to evaluate the output you're getting. Another reason why I think it's so important to work on problem definition. If you can define the problem well and you understand the work to be done because it's something you would do normally, then you can evaluate the outputs that the AI chatbot is generating, whether it's good enough or not, right? But if you don't understand the problem very well, or you haven't spent enough time thinking about it, you're going to have a hard time evaluating if that output is really helpful or not, okay? And then output iteration, right? So this idea that the AI chatbot is very clever, but it's not perfect. And just like with a human colleague, you're going to be iterating on those responses so that you can get better and better outputs as you iterate through the responses, right? And you do that by challenging, with some of those patterns that we introduced, evaluating the output, giving feedback. Normally, the progression that would happen here, it's at least how I worked through it, is once I got good at working with AI chatbots and being more effective there, then you start moving to creating specialists. Okay, what are some recurring work I have that I can start using a specialist where I can define a standard process. So here you have skills like process definition, example mapping, being able to tune the parameters, because you need to, human involvement is going to go down, but you're going to have to spend some time first training it, giving it examples, evaluating outputs, right? So you need to be able to tune those parameters and also diagnose when there are errors, right? And it's not generating the output I want. Why not, right? So your knowledge is important here still. And how to break down that task, a task decomposition, right? If you're explaining the process, you need to be able to break it down into the individual tasks that need to be done and explain those clearly. Once you start understanding how that works and you get better at that, then you can start moving to assistants, right? Where you start giving them more autonomy, and you're thinking more in workflows, and you start working on tool integrations, orchestrating context, right? And understanding in which situation is which context relevant and necessary. Thinking about quality control and risk management, because again, if you increase the autonomy of the tool, you increase the risk you're taking, right? That it's going to delete a meeting in your calendar that it shouldn't have deleted. And also in defining clear goals and constraints, right? To help it work within the autonomy you're giving it. To eventually move into real team members, right? These agents that are able to basically take care of some work by themselves without being triggered by the human, right? They just understand the responsibility they have to do. Doesn't mean you trust it 100%. You still need to be able, like you see in the skills there, monitor and evaluate, orchestrate those agents, map those dependencies to make sure like what happens if something is not correct or some input here is not correct. So it's like managing a team of people that are going to be running around doing things, right? So you need to work on the skills to be able to orchestrate that effectively. But for me, this is a natural progression. So what I usually recommend to people getting started is focus on the core skills of working effectively with AI chatbots and start playing with specialists, defining those recurring tasks or processes that can help you save time and also be more effective in some of these recurring tasks you have, right? We have in our handouts, a lot of tips for working with AI. We've talked about some of them already today. About being specific about the outputs, giving context, sharing examples, iterating, and creating specialists for repetitive tasks, asking AI to improve your prompts. So now it's your turn, right? We've talked about a lot of techniques or patterns or different things you can use. Try it out. Pick a problem that you have that you're currently working on and practice the techniques we've discussed. I would advise take 15 or 30 minutes with whatever AI chatbot you have and really try to put this into practice, right? Defining a good problem, writing good prompts, giving it the right context, iterating, challenging that reply, until you get an output that you say, wow, this is really good, and it really helped me think through the problem, right? Good, so you start with the AI chatbots, and again, what I would recommend that you can also start playing with this, working with these specialists and defining these, for these recurring tasks you have, trying to get the chatbots to behave and follow specific processes. And the effort or the practice of training the chatbots to follow that process is going to help set you up for later working with tools that have more autonomy. Before we finish, there are a couple of other points I'd like to make. One is about when to trust AI. So this is one of the things where I think the hype is a bit excessive sometimes, right? This idea we're all going to lose our jobs in the last 6 months or something like that. I don't think this is true, okay? And if we think about in the little graph I have there, right? So on the y-axis, you have in the bottom, deterministic contexts, which means context for which we can define an expected outcome, right? So we can test whether the thing is the output is correct or not, right? So that would be a deterministic context. Indeterministic, there's no real one right answer, right? And then on the x-axis, you have, okay, then we have more simple contexts and more complex contexts, right? So what we see is, okay, in deterministic contexts that are rather simple, think about these specialists, right? There we can trust AI. There's some time we need to invest in the initial learning, giving it examples, fine-tuning it, etc. But at a certain point in time, it's going to be able to do that task very effectively, right? And you need to put the necessary guardrails in place always and keep checking, but you can trust that AI can do that job effectively. When you move into deterministic context with more complex situations, like software development, for example, there I think you're in an environment where you need to check AI. You can never trust it 100% because things are more complex here, right? AIs sometimes have a tendency to simplify things, assume things, do these hallucinations people talk about. So in that scenario, you need to be checking the work of AI. When you move to indeterministic context, I think AI can support you in that work, right? So for simple context, definitely the AI is a thinking buddy, like we're discussing here today. It can definitely support you in advancing in those contexts, but you are always going to be in the lead, right? AI can only help and support. And when you get to indeterministic complex context, like, oh, we need a new strategy for my company, guess what? If the chatbot can create the strategy for your company and not you, then you have a problem, right? That's not how it should work. So yes, the AI can help structure the problem and all the things we've been discussing, but you cannot trust AI to do that because it's not going to be good at some of the key things you need in indeterministic context, right? So understanding like interpersonal relationships and things like that. So something to keep in mind as you're working with AI tools. And the last point I would like to make here is about, so one of the things I learned when working with AI tools is this idea that AI is sometimes very much like having a human colleague, right? So for example, it's very smart and capable, right? It's not stupid. If you just tell them, hey, here's some information, like, it's going to go out and do the job. It's intelligent, it's capable. It can follow processes, it can take decisions, it can learn new skills, right? So you can teach it new things. It can also make mistakes and not realize it, just like people do, right? Like, oh, I thought that was okay. Sorry, I added the wrong number there. It can listen to feedback and it can improve. Sometimes it lies and make things up. And it needs to be trained on the job you want it to do, right? It's not just like, here, I configure a process and I trust it to fully do it. No, you're going to have to train it. You're going to have to show examples, just like you would with a person, right? But there are some aspects of AI that are very unlike people, right? So some good, some bad. It can learn new skills at an incredible speed, right? So you don't have to worry about the fact, oh, I just shared 500 pages with my AI chatbot. Don't worry, it's going to take it a couple of seconds to read it, right? I like to say it's as smart as a 17-year-old with 3 PhDs, but it has no common sense or morality. So it's like this super intelligent thing that sometimes does some very, what we would consider like, why did you do it that way? This makes no sense, right? Because it lacks this common sense, what we would call common sense or morality. It can't understand interpersonal relationships, right? So office politics, emotions, and things like that. It's overly optimistic. So I wish sometimes my human colleagues were like that, but your AI chatbot is everything you suggest. Oh, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Oh, that's a great idea. That's amazing, Tiago. It's a bit overly optimistic. Like, not every idea you have is great. So you need to be aware of that. And lastly, they don't get tired. So this was another learning I had when I started working with AI tools is I became the bottleneck, right? It's just like, it's so fast in the way it's replying to you that sometimes you need to take a break and hold on a second. I need to think about this a little bit. Like, it's going faster than you can think in a sense, and you become the bottleneck. And that's a different dynamic. But remember, AI doesn't make you more intelligent, right? The point here is that it should make you more effective. You are still responsible. So my advice is focusing on developing these core skills we need to start working with AI tools and improving your effectiveness. All right. I'd like to thank everybody for joining our session today. Don't forget to sign up with your email so we can send you the handout with all the useful information. And hope to see you guys in our next stream.